level of the physician as one of the most senior, knowledgeable members of the clinical care team, I think is increasingly important.
Yeah, and you know what, when I worked with you, I really looked up to you, Dr. Maddux, because I felt like you were always looking to encourage people to find resources and to help them find those leadership, to find leadership and be able to function in the capacity that they needed to. So what are you, just in general, how would you think we should be tweaking our organizations, not necessarily the organization you're in, and maybe improve our training for the upcoming physicians? How can we be better at getting them prepared to be in leadership?
Yeah, I think physicians through their training get a lot of decision-making skills and a lot of skills in making choices and executing and acting on those choices. Where I think there can be additional opportunities for physicians to learn is how to work within groups of people, how to be collaborative in many ways, and work in a way that recognizes that decisions are frequently made at various levels in organizations, and those decisions need good counsel from the physicians as well as more of a consensus building activity. And I think those kind of skills are skills that in training would be actually quite beneficial for physicians. And I think there are programs today that are beginning to develop many of these sort of accessory skills to our primary decision making and skills that we learn as a doctor.
You know, the old way, or the more traditional way of how a lot of hospitals and organizations function is, bringing physicians on a piecemeal basis in leadership and having a more of administrative leadership, taking control of the healthcare organization. How has that hurt or helped organizations in general, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's helped a lot in allowing physicians to get on the job training, basically, in how to assimilate many of the skills that they have into group decisions and organizational activities. So I don't think it's been bad in any way. I think what we're getting with some of the younger physicians that are coming out of training now is an interest and the opportunity to actually become educated in that before they get directly into their patient care or research or whatever experience whatever track they're going down. So it strikes me that the earlier you begin to learn these skills, the easier it is to incorporate them, and the less you have to rely on whatever innate sort of skills that you might have or might have an interest in.
Yeah, coming from somebody who didn't have those innate skills, Dr. Maddux, what would you say, because I have my opinion about this, what would you say is probably the top 3 skills that somebody should learn first in order, if they have any interest at all in being in leadership, what are the top 3 skills that we should really focus in on?
Yeah, so I think there are 3 primary skills and 3 that I would say are slightly subordinated, but equally as important in being successful. The 3 primary skills, I think, continue to be, and this is true of not just physician leaders, but leaders in general. I think you've got to be authentic. You've got to recognize that you are who you are. You've got the knowledge base that you have and the experience of life that you have, and you've got to be able to use that in a way that draws other people in to want to work with you and to deal with that. So that requires the other 2 skills that I think are really the critical ones. One is listening really well, being very, very good at situational awareness and the listening that's required to know what's actually happening in a group of people or in an organization or in the room you're in. And then the third is, I think as you take on more leadership activities individually, you've got to become more selfless. We as physicians are trained to act. We make decisions, we act with patients, we choose things and move on to the next decision to be made. And I think that in leadership, you've got to be selfless and interested in subordinating your own interests into the encouragement of others to do the work and do the job that they have to do in this. So you can't be an expert in everything, and that's why I don't believe top-down leadership is really a style that fits very well for physicians. I think it's got to be one where we're bringing people along with us. And then the three subordinated things would be, one is you can't know everything. So you've got to become very comfortable with your lack of knowledge at times, and yet you still have to lead despite that lack of expertise. And that takes time to become comfortable with, because we all want to be perfect because we're sort of trained to do that. The second is, I think you've got to be willing to recognize that there are a lot of ways to get to the same end. So you've got to embrace really diverse opinions. Some of those opinions consistently will be somewhat in opposition or create some tension within a group. And that tension can be used really effectively, but it is something where if you just surround yourself with people that completely agree with everything that you're saying and doing, you're not really going to get the best result, because it requires that diversity of opinion. And then the last thing would be, and this is probably the hardest, I think, for all of us to deal with, physicians, non-physicians, is in healthcare, we're dealing with imperfect information constantly. And so you've got to still make a decision and go down a path despite not having full understanding of what the answer is going to be or what the outcome is going to be. We take risks all the time. And that ability to be comfortable taking those risks is a big piece of physician leadership.
Yeah, and also once you realize that it's not working, to be able to stop and take the big look again and make it shift again to another decision. It takes a lot. It creates a lot of fear and anxiety in people. So thank you. Those are so amazing. I want to know, how did you learn all those things, Dr. Maddux? What are the things that have really worked for you that may help someone else?
So I think I learned more from the things that didn't work than the things that worked. But I would say, for me, it's just been the experience of seeing leadership at many different levels, from when I had the chance as chief resident to look at other trainees when I had just finished training. That started a process for me of becoming extremely comfortable recognizing I wasn't going to be the smartest person in the room or know everything that was going on. And yet I had to become fully comfortable that there really wasn't anything I couldn't figure out or learn if I took the time and made the effort. I think the traits of experience actually help a lot. Just realizing that we're all going to make mistakes and we're all going to have both successes and failures, and recognizing that managing the successes in a way that don't cause you to feel like you have to have that level of success every time something happens. And because otherwise you can paralyze yourself by the fear of not being successful. And then when you do fail, actually honestly looking at what happened to try to understand what you might do differently in the future. And for me, those are huge opportunities to create good leadership with that.
So I wanted to, those are such great points, and it's kind of funny how not funny, but it's interesting that you bring up, the fear part, the being authentic, to be able to step back and say, I'm not the expert in everything. All of that stems from a strong sense of self, strong sense of self-image, even though you appear to, have some discomfort, but really deep inside, it's like you're so aware and so self-assured and have that confidence to lead. Where does that come from, Dr. Maddux?
Yeah, I think it comes from truly getting to a comfort level that if you're put on the spot and you don't know something, you're willing to say, I just don't know. I'll go figure it out. I know I'm bright enough, I'm capable enough, I have enough resources to go figure out an answer. But to become truly comfortable that you don't have to, on the spot, understand everything completely, and be able to step back and really study it. So that for me, it's been the ability to use that as a technique to come back and then really have substance to whatever the question was or the answer was that I needed to help provide. And I think if you relieve yourself of the burden of having to know everything immediately, then I think you can actually honestly get down to the conversations that really need to happen. And for me, those were, when I became comfortable with that, it made it a lot easier for me to work with other people to realize that my own perspective wasn't the only one out there, and that it was a big shift from the way I had to act when I was practicing, where a patient and myself needed to make a decision right then on something. Very different when you're in a group organization, you've got time to go figure some things out. The pace of things is fundamentally slower in organizations and administrative activity. Very different
Doesn't mean you're
from,
not as busy as you were before. You're probably busier than ever.
yeah, you're busier than ever, but it's a different kind of busy. And frankly, there are good things and bad things about it. I mean, there is, and you know it because you have seen it in your practice as well. But there is an excitement to the ability to need to make a decision right away, and really, that's going to make a huge difference for an individual. When you begin looking at physician leadership, where you're looking at not just a single patient, but large groups of patients and large groups of medical staff and other such things, it becomes it's a different way of creating an impact, and it creates a very broad impact, but it also creates one where you're not in the middle of a code where you've got to make a decision in the moment, and I think that those skills are slightly different skills that we just need to train ourselves for and make sure the muscles for that are well tested and in good shape.
Right. Thank you so much. These are such great tips for people. I wanted to know, how do you go about choosing the leaders? I know you're constantly moving in and out of you finding people and trying to diversify your group. What are the traits that you look for in a physician as you bring them onto teams?
Yeah. So I think the traits that we talked about before, I think really are true. I look for authenticity, that I really, the person's being who they really are in and of themselves. I look for, I pay a lot of attention to situational awareness and try to look at examples of that people might have. I do think we lead others through our actions and our words. And so I think our actions speak for themselves, but our words can be variable. And so I think people who can communicate in an articulate way and are capable of speaking at the level of the audience that they're speaking to is really important. So the flexibility of being aware of self enough is a big piece of that. And then I think trying to find somebody that recognizes the ambitions of physicians. Physicians in leadership positions act different than physicians in practice because of this change in sort of decision-making speed that has to occur. Again, when you're with a patient, they've got a problem you've got to deal with right now. You have to take a little bit of a different approach than I think if you've got three people that you need to hear each of their opinions, think about it, and then come up with either a consensus or a dissenting type opinion on what we're actually going to do. And looking for people that are comfortable with that switch from what they've been doing to what they would need to do are things I look for.
That's so true. More dictator type leadership style to more of a collaborative style, it seems.
Yeah. One of the things I see in different parts of the world are a slow change. In some parts of the world, we still live by what I'll call eminence-based medicine, where the most senior person, whatever they say, is kind of what everybody down the tree does and what happens. But what I think is happening is a slow shift to much more discussion, recognition that there's several paths to solve most problems, clinical problems, research problems, administrative problems, and there's not always one right way to do it. And it isn't just my way that's always the best way. So I look for people that are recognizing that they're going to have to be more collaborative with other people within the healthcare ecosystem. I think that's a greater path to success for physician leaders than ones that simply say, this is how it's done, period.
At the same time, having been that more of a dictator type of leader who didn't do so well with my employees within my first surgical center, Dr. Maddux. I have that whole TEDx talk on that, but I think that we also need to give physicians, at least younger physicians who are willing, the chance to learn how to make that shift and not necessarily already be there to get on board.
Yeah, I would say during my career, I've watched a lot of physicians transition from practicing physicians into a combination of practice and administrative roles or strictly administrative leadership roles. And each one of them goes through a different journey. I have not seen a consistent one, and some have been more successful than others at being able to make that transition either more quickly or with less stress on themselves. I know my own journey with that was one that took many, many years, and I did it over a rather slow conversion. And so that made it a little easier for me, but I'm not sure that's the right way for many people. But it's one that I think you have to be intentional about. You've got to actually recognize you're going to feel bad. You're going to feel non-productive for a while. And that non-productiveness is because you go from day by day, multiple decisions to week by week, month by month, one or two decisions, or some cadence that's fundamentally different than we're doing. And that can make you feel like you sort of at the end of the day say, what did I get accomplished today? And it's, you did move things along, but it's at a very different pace.
I just want people to recognize people like you, Dr. Maddux, who can make some huge shifts for the better of people, like globally now you're doing. So I just encourage physicians out there, if you're watching this and you're thinking, I don't know if I can do what he's saying, to recognize that it starts from somewhere, and we all come from a certain culture from the education, and hopefully that will change over time, but you can make that shift, and everyone has a different.
I think most physicians can make the shift, but they need to be intentional about it and say, this is important for me to do for my career. This is important for the organization to be a better organization. And for many physicians, what's gratifying for them in making that shift is the impact they can have on many, many people, large populations of people, as opposed to simply the individual that we can help that has a problem today. And I think if physicians recognize that distinction, then I think most of them can actually make that shift.
Thank you for this time. Let's wrap it up by asking you one last thing. Is you send books every year to your leadership team. I'm so grateful for. I hope I thanked you before. I don't know if I did, but I was grateful for that. You send some really interesting books to the leadership team, and I'm wondering, what are the top maybe one or two or three books that you think might be a good starter for somebody to read?
The books that I sent over the years were sort of topical for what was going on in our organization at the time. But I think some of the ones that I really like, there was one by a guy named Chip Heath called Switch that I liked quite a bit.
Yes, okay.
And it was about how to think differently and think more broadly.
Awesome.
I think last year I sent a book that was called The Infinite Game. And it was about looking at long-term decisions, not just at the short term, because we spend so much time with short-term thinking and sort of short-term results. And certainly organizations today, post-pandemic, need to be thinking in the long run quite a bit more.
Love that.
Those are two that I really liked. And then Daniel Kahneman, who was a Nobel Prize economist. It was a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's a great book for folks.
Gosh, thank you so much. I appreciate this. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you're interested in being interviewed like Dr. Maddux, please reach out to me at info@drlcco.com. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Until next Sunday, take care, everybody.
Thank you.